I was walking down the aisle in white heels and a white dress, finally marrying the man who saw me beyond the limp, when I heard it. A laughter, a snort, a whisper, "She's still walking like that?" On the most important day of my life, they were mocking me. Again. I'm Emily. For over 30 years, I was called dramatic, attention-seeking, even by my own parents. But 2 weeks before that wedding, I had surgery, one I never told them about, and when the truth came out, they didn't laugh anymore. Have you ever been ridiculed for something you couldn't control? Share your story in the comments, because shame doesn't live here anymore. They said I was faking it before I even knew what faking meant. I didn't know what the word meant, really. Not when I was 6, not when I was dragging my left foot slightly behind the right as I ran across the muddy yard behind our house. I just knew that when I tried to keep up with the other kids, I always ended up falling behind. My legs didn't move the same way theirs did, and somehow that was my fault. Our house on Willow Street had peeling paint and creaky floors that moaned louder than the people living on them. Leaves collected in soggy piles outside the door, waiting for someone to sweep them aside. No one ever did. Inside, the linoleum in the kitchen was cracked where Dad's chair always scraped. It screeched every night when he stood up from dinner, pushing the chair back with one booted foot, the same way he'd nudge anything broken or out of place. I remember once, I had a toy truck, one of those plastic ones missing a wheel. I had been trying to fix it all day. I left it by the kitchen door while setting the table, hopeful I could finish it after dinner. As Dad walked in, he saw it and kicked it sideways without blinking, like it was trash that had dared to exist. "What's with the limp again?" he said that night, glancing over his plate without really looking at me. "Trying to get out of chores again, huh?" I didn't answer. I was too focused on cutting the overcooked pork chop without wobbling in my seat. Mom sat across from me, her fork moving slow through mashed potatoes. She didn't say anything. She rarely did when Dad spoke in that tone. Her eyes flicked toward me once, then back to her plate, like a pause button being tapped but never held. School was no better. The clink of my shoes down the hallway echoed louder than the chatter of the other kids. I started learning how to walk more quietly, shifting my weight, adjusting the way I turned corners. But Ms. Bishop, my first-grade teacher, noticed anyway. She was one of those teachers who wore cardigans with leaf-shaped pins in the fall. She had gentle eyes and a way of crouching to our level that made her seem part of our world, not above it. One afternoon, as the class filed out to recess, she touched my shoulder and said softly, "Emily, why don't you stay back for a second?" I thought I was in trouble. Instead, she knelt next to me, watching how I stood. "Does your leg hurt, sweetheart?" she asked. I shook my head, but not because it didn't. I just didn't know how to answer. That night, Mom got a call. The phone was corded, stretched across the counter like a spider web. She cradled it between her ear and shoulder while stirring a pot of beans, murmuring, and "of course," while Dad turned the volume up on the TV. The next morning, she told me we were going to see a doctor. "Just to be safe," she said, tying my shoelaces with a softness she rarely showed. The clinic was bright and cold, smelling like rubbing alcohol and mystery. The paper on the exam table crinkled loudly under me. The doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, tapped on my knee and asked me to walk back and forth. He said after a few rounds. Then he left to grab something from the hallway. When he came back with x-rays and words I didn't understand, I stared at the posters behind him, ones that showed cartoon bones and smiling kids. "She has a congenital deformity," he explained. "Not rare, but should have been addressed earlier. Braces can help, but—" He paused, glancing at my mother. "Ideally, surgery would have happened years ago." Mom nodded slowly. Her hands wrung the handle of her purse until her knuckles turned white. "Braces, then," she said. The word sounded like a sentence. We picked them up the following week, metal leg braces that buckled around my thighs and calves, cooled to the touch, biting into my socks when I walked. I looked like a robot, only less powerful. At home, when I stepped into the living room with them for the first time, Dad let out a snort and said, "Well, look at that. Got your little pity device after all. Hope you enjoy the spotlight." I didn't answer. I looked down at my legs, at the buckles cinched by a nurse whose hands smelled faintly of lavender lotion. Later that night, after dinner had gone cold on my plate and the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge, I lay in bed tracing the ridges of the braces with my fingers. From the next room, I heard my parents talking about grocery lists and bills, as if nothing important had happened, as if I hadn't been told my body wasn't wrong, just late in getting the help it needed. I pulled the blanket over my face and whispered into the stillness, just loud enough for myself to hear, "It's not fake. I know it's not." And that was the first time I ever told myself I was real. I studied other kids the way scientists study wild animals, how they moved without thinking, how their knees bent without strain, their strides swung with ease. I'd sit at the edge of the lunchroom or near the gym lockers and observe, watching how they carried backpacks, climbed stairs, twisted to grab things from the floor, all without a second thought. I didn't want to be like them. I wanted to move like them. By then I was 14, and my braces had long since come off. The doctors had said my bones had done what they could, and now it was about habits and managing expectations. Whatever that meant, no one used the word permanent, but I knew it lived behind their eyes. My gait was better, at least that's what my mother said once when I asked. "Looks normal enough," she'd shrugged, checking the oven. "Still limping?" became her version of asking how school was. I stopped answering after a while. In the hallways of Franklin High, my walk became an experiment. I'd mimic girls in glossy magazines, heels together, knees slightly turned in. I watched YouTube videos on runway posture, not for the glamour, but for the balance. I practiced at night in my room, angling my hips, clenching my calves, holding my arms just loose enough to swing naturally. I wore out 3 full-length mirrors in 5 years, not from vanity, but from necessity. The thing about pretending to walk normally is that it costs you more than energy. It costs you attention. I became obsessed with how I moved, and not just in front of people. Even alone, I never relaxed. I imagined I was always being watched, always judged. The town square was cold most of the year. Indiana winters crept in early and overstayed their welcome. I told myself the numbness in my feet was from the cold, from bad socks, from sitting too long on the bus. But deep down, I knew. Muscles I wasn't meant to use that way were overworked. Joints bent wrong too many times. Still, I pushed. Pain became part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or finishing homework, something to get through. One December, the school hosted a winter pep rally. It was the kind of thing I usually tried to avoid. Too many bleachers, too many eyes. But that year, attendance was mandatory. The gym smelled like sweat and candy canes, a strange mix of effort and celebration. Students wore red and green hats and face paint. I wore jeans and a hoodie and kept to the back. On the way down the bleachers, someone bumped me. Just a small shove, not even on purpose. My left foot hit a slick patch of ice tracked in from boots, and I slipped. Not a hard fall, no bruises, but loud. The echo of my knees hitting the metal stairs rang out like a dropped cymbal. Laughter followed. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. Some chuckled nervously, others just kept walking. Someone said, "Geez, still with the weird walk?" And a few more snickered. I didn't say anything, just stood, brushed myself off, and walked out of the gym, each step stiff, robotic, too fast. My cheeks burned hotter than the gym lights. No one followed. In the girls' bathroom, I locked myself in the last stall. It was quiet there, only the hum of fluorescent lights and a distant echo of music from the gym. I sat on the closed lid, pulling my sleeves over my hands. My knees throbbed. I let the tears come, silently, no sobs, just steady tracks down my cheeks. When the ache dulled, I stood. The mirror above the sink had a long scratch across it, splitting my reflection into 2 halves. I stared at them both. Then, like I was reading lines in a school play, I said it aloud, slowly. "You are normal. You are normal." The words felt like they belonged to someone else. On the way home, I didn't talk. My mother picked me up and barely looked up from the dashboard. "Fun rally?" she asked. I said, "Fine." That night, after icing my knees in the dark, I booted up our shared family laptop and typed a phrase I'd been avoiding: how to walk like everyone else. The search results were endless. Exercises, posture guides, blogs from physical therapists. None of them knew me. None of them had been told their limp was just an attention grab. None of them had been called weird on every birthday, every school picture day, every casual walk to the corner store. But I read them anyway, clicked each link like it might carry a piece of the code I hadn't cracked yet. If other girls were born knowing how to move, I would teach myself. I bookmarked 6 pages, then stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from running or crying or thinking too much. It comes from performing, all day, every day. I hadn't realized until then just how tired I was. Still, I didn't sleep. I copied links onto a sheet of paper and slid it under my mattress. My version of prayer. On the happiest day of my life, I limped down the aisle to applause and whispers. The breeze was light, the sky politely overcast, and the white canopy fluttered like a movie set. Everything had been chosen carefully. Lavender centerpieces, pale green ribbons on the chairs, string quartet humming through Vivaldi. I had even picked the dress with sleeves to feel secure. But the shoes... oh, the shoes, white satin heels that felt like tiny cages. I told myself they were worth it, that I could make it through one day of pretending my body didn't protest. But I was wrong. As I stepped out from behind the arbor, I caught a hush ripple through the seated guests. It was the kind of silence you only notice if you're used to being stared at. I'd felt it in school hallways, grocery store aisles, even church. A slight delay between sight and smile. This time the eyes were softer, polite. But I saw it. A couple leaned toward each other, whispering. A woman lifted her phone, lowered it quickly. Someone near the back chuckled, a short exhale of amusement, like they'd spotted a typo in the program. I focused on Michael. He stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, face calm, eyes locked on mine. He didn't look at my feet. He never did. My heels dug into the grass with each step. I had practiced walking in them the night before, 20 minutes back and forth across our apartment, but the uneven lawn, the soft earth, the pressure of the moment, it was too much. My gait faltered. A tiny wobble. My ankle turned slightly. I corrected quickly, hoping no one noticed. They noticed. At the end of the aisle, Michael took my hands gently. "You look perfect," he whispered. I smiled, not fully. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set. When the officiant pronounced us married, people clapped. I couldn't tell if they clapped because they were happy or because the awkward walk was over. The reception began under a wide-open tent, light streaming through sheer panels, tables dressed in linen. The string quartet played something upbeat now, and guests filled plates with roasted chicken and honey-glazed carrots. Michael and I made our way through the reception line, hands shaking, cheeks kissed. Everyone smiled. Everyone complimented the dress, the flowers, the music. Then a woman from my father's office leaned in, wine glass tipping in her hand. "Such a unique gait," she said, in the tone of someone describing modern art. "Really makes you stand out." I blinked, smiled too hard, said, "Thank you." She moved on. A few minutes later, Dad was handed a microphone. It wasn't part of the plan. He hadn't prepared anything, but someone encouraged him. He stood awkwardly in the center of the tent and tapped the mic twice. "Well," he began, shifting from one foot to the other. "Michael, you're getting one of a kind. Emily's always had, let's call it a memorable walk." He laughed. So did a few others. I laughed too, just enough to be polite. Michael didn't laugh. He took a sip of champagne, eyes fixed on my hands, twisting a napkin in my lap. After the toast, he leaned in close and asked, "Want to sit for a bit?" "I'm fine," I said, but I wasn't. My calves ached, my toes were numb, my spine was tired from holding so much of myself in place. He excused us from the line for a few minutes. We stepped into the shade behind the tent. That's when he pulled a small drawstring bag from his jacket pocket. Inside, a pair of ivory ballet flats. "Figured we'd get here eventually," he said, not smug, just matter of fact. I almost cried. Instead, I sat on a folding chair, slipped them on, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for hours. The rest of the evening passed like a painting, blurry in the edges, too bright in the center. Cake was cut. Dances swayed under string lights. My mother asked about our honeymoon plans. My father avoided me. The night ended with sparklers and clinking glasses. When we got home, I unzipped my dress slowly. The corset loosened with a gasp. I stepped out of it and watched it collapse on the floor like a shed skin. In the mirror, my shoulders slumped. My feet were red and puffy. The skin behind my knees had deep creases from too many hours of tension. Michael came in with 2 mugs of tea. He didn't say anything, just placed one on my nightstand and kissed the top of my head. When he left the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled my phone from the charger. I typed, "Nerve damage from walking incorrectly." Dozens of links appeared. I read each headline like it was an old note passed in class. Gait correction in adults, chronic overcompensation, sciatic pain, early signs of nerve impingement. I clicked one, then another, and another. The dress was still on the floor. The corset's boning had left marks on my ribs. Even on my wedding day, they saw the limp before the love, and I wasn't sure which hurt more. The pain came first, then the numbness. The silence came last. It began in my right foot, during a short walk from the parking lot to the grocery store. My toes tingled, then went cold, then vanished altogether. At least that's how it felt, like my foot had simply exited the conversation. I stood in aisle 7, staring at cans of crushed tomatoes, waiting for the sensation to return. When it didn't, I checked out early, drove home, and told no one. I thought maybe I'd slept on it wrong. Maybe I needed new shoes. Maybe, like in middle school, my legs were just being dramatic again. But it kept happening. Not every day, but often enough to become a new layer of background anxiety. My left leg joined in next, then both knees felt unstable, like walking on thick felt instead of bone. I told myself I was overreacting. I iced, I stretched, I Googled. Then I woke up one morning and couldn't feel my shins at all. That was the day I made the appointment. It was early January 2022, cold enough that the sidewalks in Indianapolis were crusted with salt and slush. I wore my thickest socks and a scarf that Michael had given me for Christmas, navy blue with tiny snowflakes stitched into the ends. The hospital lobby was bright and sterile, its lighting too white, its smells too clean. It reminded me of the pediatric clinic from when I was 6, but colder, more grown up in its indifference. Michael offered to come with me. I told him I was fine. He drove me anyway and waited in the parking lot with a coffee and a crossword. Dr. Alan Chen was younger than I expected. Kind eyes, efficient hands. He asked questions without judgment. When I described the numbness, he nodded slowly. "Any prior leg conditions?" he asked, tapping the keyboard. "Congenital deformity," I replied. I wore braces as a kid. He ordered imaging. The MRI took 40 minutes, the whirring machine vibrating through the table like a low growl. I stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about anything. When we sat down again, Dr. Chen had a folder in his lap. He opened it, removed a printout, and angled it toward me. "There's extensive nerve impingement," he said. "Compressed tissue, degeneration along both lower extremities. This didn't happen overnight." I didn't say anything. He continued, gently. "This level of wear typically results from years of misalignment. Most cases like this are corrected surgically in infancy or early childhood." I nodded, but it felt like he was describing someone else. "Surgery is still an option," he added. "We'd relieve pressure, adjust gait mechanics, possibly restore function, but the longer we wait, the more permanent the damage becomes." I asked him how soon. He said he could schedule it within the month. When I left his office, the cold air hit me like a splash of water. Michael looked up from the passenger seat as I slid into the car. "Well?" he asked. "It's what I thought," I said. "Just worse." We drove in silence. That night at dinner, I picked at a bowl of mushroom risotto that Michael had made. It smelled rich, earthy, the way winter comfort food should smell, but I couldn't taste any of it. My tongue felt as numb as my legs. Michael poured us both sparkling water and took a seat. He didn't push. He never did. But after a few minutes, he asked, "Are you going to tell them?" I didn't look up. "They'll just say I faked the pain too." His lips parted, then closed again. He nodded once, accepting the truth of it. The next morning, I called the hospital. The receptionist asked for my insurance. I gave it. She asked for available dates. I picked one. She asked, "Who should we list as your emergency contact?" I paused. "Michael Adams," I said. "Husband." She typed something quickly. "Anyone else?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. "No one else?" Later, I received the pre-op instructions in my inbox. What to eat, what not to, a checklist of blood tests and consent forms. I filled them out while sitting on the couch with a blanket over my knees, snow tapping the windows. Michael came home with groceries. He unpacked them while I finished the last form. I didn't mention the surgery date. He didn't ask. That night in bed, I lay flat, arms at my sides, eyes open. The ceiling fan rotated slowly overhead, stirring stale warmth. A long time ago, I had waited for someone to notice my limp. Now I was praying they wouldn't notice anything at all. If they never ask, I thought, maybe I'll never have to lie. Some silences protect, others destroy. This one? This one felt like armor. I told my mother over the phone while stirring butternut squash soup. The spoon moved in slow, lazy circles, as if the motion alone might steady my nerves. Outside, the Indianapolis sky glowed a pale orange, the kind of light that only shows up in late November, soft and fleeting. Jazz crackled from a dusty speaker near the window. Miles Davis, I think. Michael was chopping parsley, his sleeves rolled up, his movements careful. The apartment smelled of nutmeg, browned butter, and something sweet I couldn't quite name. The call had come just as I reached for the salt. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice slightly louder than necessary, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. "Just checking in before the holidays. You two got big plans?" "Staying in this year," I replied, still facing the pot. "Quiet Thanksgiving." "That's smart," she said quickly. "Avoid the travel mess. You know how your dad gets when the traffic builds up." I made a small sound of agreement. Michael gave me a glance, half sympathy, half signal. "You don't have to go deeper." But I was already in. "I had leg surgery," I said, 2 weeks ago. The silence was instant, not the confused kind, not even angry. It was the kind of pause that comes when someone knows, deep down, they've missed something important and don't know how to walk it back. What?" she said finally. "Surgery," I repeated, "on both legs." "But why, what happened? Were you in an accident?" I almost laughed. Number just 25 years of damage catching up. Another pause. "Why didn't you tell us?" I turned the heat down on the stove, set the spoon aside, and leaned my hands on the counter. The warmth from the soup had started to fade, just like the patience I'd been clinging to since recovery began. "Because you never really believed me," I said. "You told me I was faking." "For years." "That's not true," she replied instantly. Her voice was sharper now. "We didn't say that." I felt Michael pause mid-chop. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. "You did," I said evenly. "You both did. You said I walked funny to get attention, that I made it worse by thinking about it too much, that the braces were just a phase. That was," she trailed off, "we were trying our best." I exhaled slowly. "You may have been trying, but it wasn't your best." The quiet that followed wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was just empty, like we'd run out of things to pretend about. "I could come out," she said eventually, "to help, or just visit, if you want." Michael placed the parsley into a small dish, then walked over and checked the oven where the garlic bread had started to brown. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his attention holding me steady. "I'm okay," I said. "Michael's here. He's been great." Another pause. Then, It would have been nice to know. I looked down at my feet. They were bare. The swelling had gone down, but faint bruises still colored the sides. 2 weeks post-op, and I still hadn't shown them to anyone but Michael and the nurses. "You never asked," I said softly. She didn't respond. "I'll let you go," she said after a few beats. "You probably need rest." "I do." "Well, happy Thanksgiving." "You too." The line went dead before I could say anything more. I set the phone down face first on the counter and turned off the burner. Michael brought 2 bowls to the table, placing one in front of me like a quiet offering. I sat slowly, easing my legs beneath me, the stiffness still lingering like a stubborn shadow. He touched my wrist gently. "How'd it go?" I shook my head. "She wants to visit." He didn't press, just handed me a folded napkin and took his seat. We ate in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the kind that fills a space after truth has been spoken out loud and there's nothing left to dress it up. Outside, the last of the sunlight disappeared behind the neighboring building. Inside, the lamp above our table buzzed faintly. After dinner, I rinsed the bowls, then sat on the couch with my legs stretched out and elevated on 2 pillows. Michael dozed in the armchair with a book in his lap. I picked up my phone again. No follow-up messages, no love you or we're proud of you, just the echo of her voice stuck somewhere between defense and regret. I typed, "Thanks for calling." That was it. No emoji, no flourish. I watched the screen for a while, then hit send. There's a quiet that comes after surgery, a stillness that isn't just in the body but in the mind. It clears space, not for reconciliation but for recognition, for acknowledgement that what was broken is no longer in someone else's hands. It's mine now. All of it. It wasn't the surgery that freed me, it was the silence after. The quiet settled in slowly, like early morning fog rolling over the city. It filled every corner of our apartment, soft, clean, unbothered. For the first time in years, there was no background noise of doubt, no internal script repeating the need to justify myself. Just the tick of the old clock in the living room and the distant shushing of snow being pushed aside by unseen tires. It was early January, and the new year still smelled like pine and clean paper. I sat in the kitchen, wrapped in Michael's thick wool cardigan, the one he never officially gave me but stopped asking for back. A mug of black coffee steamed beside me. Outside, the sidewalks were dusted in powdery white, and the trees along our street wore little icicle earrings. My laptop glowed in front of me, cursor blinking like a small heartbeat. The document had been open for days, but this morning it felt ready. I read the title again, What They Didn't See. I didn't write it to accuse. Not really. I wrote it because the version of my story that existed in other people's minds, the one with the exaggeration, the attention-seeking, the funny walk, wasn't the one I lived in. That version had never belonged to me. This one did. My fingers moved without hesitation. I wrote about the metal braces, the peanut butter sandwich smell of my elementary school, the linoleum floor that echoed with every step I didn't know how to make quiet. I wrote about how my father said I walked that way on purpose, how my mother said, "She'll grow out of it." I wrote about the girls in high school with perfect posture and glossy shoes, and how I'd practiced alone in my room to mimic them until my hips ached. I described the Google searches, the pain I never spoke about, the way cold weather crept up my legs like shame. I wrote about my wedding day, the whispered comments, the smirking toast, the heels that punished me for pretending to be someone else's version of elegant. I wrote about the surgery and the silence that followed, the stillness I built not in rebellion, but in reclamation. Michael passed through the kitchen once or twice. He didn't speak, just refilled my mug, placed a fresh napkin beside it, and kissed my cheek before disappearing into the other room. That was his way. Present, never pressing. When the final sentence came, it wasn't profound. It was simple. I was never pretending. I was surviving. I read the essay twice, not to edit it, just to feel it. Then I clicked post. I waited, but not for replies. I didn't need praise. I didn't need defense, I needed space, and I had finally made it for myself. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed once. It was from my mother. I read it. "I'm sorry." That was all. I didn't reply. I read her message again, held the phone in both hands, and let the words float through me. They didn't fix anything. They weren't meant to. They were a quiet ripple in water that had long since gone still. I set the phone face down and walked to the window. Outside, a man in a wool coat was walking a slow-moving Labrador through the snow. A little girl in a puffy pink jacket was trying to catch flakes on her tongue. I got dressed. A sweater, jeans that no longer pinched around the knees, my warmest socks, and stepped out. The sidewalk gave slightly under my boots. No slipping, no second-guessing where to place my feet, no tensing. I just walked. At the corner cafe, an older man held the door open. "After you," he said with a gentle smile. I smiled back. "Thanks." No one looked twice, no one whispered, no one noticed the angle of my steps or the tilt of my hips. The world didn't pause for me, and I didn't need it to. For the first time in my life, I moved without apology. The walk back was even slower, not out of pain, but out of choice. I let the wind sting my cheeks. I let the sun find the top of my scalp. I let myself feel how unremarkable I had become, and how that in itself was remarkable. This wasn't a grand victory. No medals, no crowd, no movie score building behind me. It was just a Tuesday morning in January. And I was walking. My body wasn't theirs anymore. Not a subject of jokes, of disbelief, of convenient denial. It wasn't something to be fixed, to make others comfortable, or minimized so I could belong. It was mine. Entirely. The silence I used to fear had become my favorite sound. I didn't need anyone to notice the way I walked that morning. For the first time, it simply didn't matter. What mattered was that each step felt like it belonged to me. Sometimes healing doesn't come from being heard. It comes from finally listening to yourself. In a world that often rewards silence with invisibility, choosing to speak your truth can be the most courageous act of all. And when love shows up quietly, without judgment, it teaches us that not all apologies need to be spoken to feel real. If this story reminds you of your own journey, or someone else's, feel free to share your thoughts. There's always room at the table for another voice, another heart, another beginning.